Are U.S. companies pumping money into China's military advancement? A congressional committee is trying to find out. Chinese e-commerce giants Temu and Shein duking it out in U.S. courts. Temu accuses Shein of bullying its suppliers, but that's far from the only legal woes Shein is grappling with. Thousands taking to the streets in Washington, D.C., calling for an end to a brutal campaign of human rights abuses spanning decades. And how deadly is China's COVID-19 pandemic? A leaked count of funeral cremations offers a hint. The data quickly wiped after its release. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Are U.S. venture capital firms funding China's AI and military development? That's what the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has decided to investigate. Committee leaders sent letters to 4 American firms demanding to know the extent of their dealings with the CCP. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us more.
The House Select Committee on the CCP is launching investigations into several U.S. companies that it claims are funding the Chinese regime's development of artificial intelligence and military modernization. Committee Chair Mike Gallagher and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamurthy sent letters to the leaders of 4 American venture capital firms expressing serious concern about their investments in AI, microchip, and quantum computing companies in China. The letters were sent to GGV Capital, GST Ventures, Qualcomm Ventures, and Walden International. The lawmakers request the leadership for each fund answer a series of questions about their investments in Chinese companies. That includes what companies they are investing in, the dollar amounts of each investment, their policies concerning investments in such companies, what course of action the funds would take if companies they invested in were sanctioned by the U.S., and the role the CCP plays in each company. Gallagher told NTD's Sam Wong the most complex aspects of competition with China are economic and technological issues.
Figuring out, what is the line for selective decoupling, figuring out how we don't subsidize our own destruction. These are very, very difficult things to do. And so the more we have an open debate like this, I think it refines our thinking and increases the chance that we'll arrive at a durable legislative solution.
Gallagher says the goal of the investigation is to create a record that can help Congress pass a strong bill to stop problematic investments in Chinese companies. Nazak Nikektar, the former Undersecretary for Industry and Security at the U.S. Department of Commerce, says if the U.S. wants its allies to follow it in countering the Chinese regime, it needs to clearly define its terms and lead by example.
Our allies are watching us, and if our rules have loopholes, right, then they're going to know that they can move in the same way, kind of develop these rules that ultimately mean nothing. If we really are to get our allies on board, then we need to have ironclad rules and expect to do the same.
The letter sent to the 4 U.S. firms says some of the companies receiving U.S. money are linked to the persecution and ongoing genocide of Uyghurs in China. Gallagher says the probe into the 4 firms is the beginning of a broader investigation. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Before we continue with today's news, a quick announcement. We're bringing you a very special story tomorrow, one that we hold dear and that few of our viewers know about, the founding of our media. How does it tie into one of the most brutal human rights abuses in China? And how did our founders survive Beijing's unrelenting threats here on U.S. soil? Websites attacked, advertisers threatened. One chief technology officer blindfolded to a chair and beaten. All this and more coming up tomorrow. Chinese fashion giant Shein is facing more legal woes in the States, this time from fellow Chinese e-commerce giant Temu. The conflict is over suppliers. Temu is accusing Shein of stealing its manufacturers. Temu's lawsuit alleges Shein forced exclusivity deals with suppliers into only working with Shein, thus forcing Temu to look elsewhere. Temu claims Shein has taken over 8,000 suppliers in China. That amounts to around 70 to 80% of the merchants who would fill that market. The lawsuit goes on to accuse Shein of slapping fines on those who did work with Temu. As for why the lawsuits are taking place in the U.S., Temu claims Shein is hurting its growth in the country. Shein has dismissed the suit as, quote, without merit. Both companies have taken the U.S. market by storm. Shein entered the U.S. market in 2017, but Temu has been trying to catch up. And it seems Shein felt threatened. Last December, Shein took Temu to court, accusing it of hogging influencers. Temu is owned by PDD Holdings, along with Chinese e-commerce giant Pinduoduo. It's known for selling home goods from apparel to electronics, all at dirt cheap prices. It's currently one of the top downloaded apps in the U.S., along with Shein, according to Sensor Tower. Shein is a fast fashion retailer from China. It's popular among millennials and Gen Zers in the U.S., now worth $66 billion. But Temu's suit is in the end of Shein's legal woes. In a California federal court, Shein is facing a lawsuit by 3 designers, accusing the company of copyright infringement to the level of violating the RICO Act, an anti-racketeering law used to go after organized crime. A massive parade marching through America's capital. Thousands of spiritual practitioners taking to the streets, calling for an end to Beijing's persecution campaign against Falun Gong, one of the largest faith groups inside China. The death toll from the brutal clampdown still climbing. Our very own Melina Weisskopf brings us more from Capitol Hill.
We're here in the heart of the nation where thousands of Falun Dafa practitioners have gathered to raise awareness and call for the end to the 24-year-long persecution against this spiritual practice. We spoke to some of them who are here today who actually lived through this persecution in China.
And she was arrested immediately and sent to the detention center. By that time, I lost contact with my mom for 2 weeks.
Her mom's sudden disappearance is only part of the story. Li Jing began the practice as a young girl at age 13, making social life difficult due to the CCP's propaganda campaign to squash the practice.
So I felt isolated. Even though I know Falun Gong is righteous, I had to hide it from my new friends.
And her story is one of millions. Even today, the pressure hasn't stopped for these spiritual believers. Some can't help but question why.
Electrical batons to beat me. I lost my consciousness. Well, we just practice meditation. We try to do our best to be a good person. I believe that's the best. It's the universal values.
Raising awareness in the streets of Washington, D.C., they hold signs reading, "In the CCP, humanity's only hope is to improve morality." And Falun Dafa is great.
It is up to us to stand up for those being persecuted in China and to make our voices heard.
We also know there is growing evidence that the CCP is even harvesting organs from religious and ethnic minorities around the world.
The House passed a bill recently to hold the CCP accountable for forced organ harvesting, of which Falun Gong practitioners are often the victims.
Organ harvesting bill which has the most realistic chance of being passed and sent to the president's desk for signature.
Many speakers encouraged the spiritual practitioners to continue to stand up against this atrocity and thanked them for their courage in not letting the CCP wipe out the practice of Falun Dafa, which has since spread to over 100 countries around the world. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Why do China watchers say Falun Gong is the largest civil disobedience movement inside modern-day China? Here's a quick look at our upcoming special report.
That is, tens of millions of Falun Gong people every day are creating an underground media, leaflets, pamphlets about the persecution they face, about the terrible history of the CCP, and usually undercover at night, they're leaving it on doorsteps. And this is happening all over China. Big cities, small villages, and everything in between. And so there's a tremendous groundswell in China to let the people know what the true history of the regime is, what's really happening to Falun Gong, and that's creating a lot of awareness.
The special report airs on YouTube tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern and on NTD Broadcast TV this Saturday, July 22nd at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. A heated discussion on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers grilling several Biden administration officials for their strategy on Communist China. NTD's Sam Wong brings us the latest.
The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party held a hearing Thursday, addressing the Biden administration's current approach in dealing with the CCP. Committee Chairman Mike Gallagher, a Republican, started off by praising several of the administration's policy measures in dealing with China.
Secretary of State Blinken reiterated the determination that the CCP was committing genocide in Xinjiang. The administration levied historic export controls on advanced U.S. semiconductors and equipment going to the PRC. The administration then succeeded in aligning its policy with critical allies.
The hearing comes on the heels of a visit to China by several top U.S. officials, aiming to put a stalled relationship back into motion. In a change of tone, Gallagher said that such a diplomatic approach has put Washington in a compromising position.
And instead of holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable, the administration chased CCP diplomats around the world, seeking meetings in Beijing as if they, not the CCP, had something to apologize for.
Representative Blaine Luetkemeyer said that China is running on a surplus in its trade with the U.S., and that extra pile of cash in China's pocket could be used to subsidize the regime's military capacity and its human rights abuses. Here's this exchange with Thea Rosman-Kentler, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Export Administration.
We're funding, by $382 billion of a deficit, their activities. Would you not agree with that?
We are aggressively contending with the strategic trade threat posed by China.
No, you're not. No, you're not. I'm tired of your flowery language this morning. Please answer the question.
Washington recently stepped up restrictions on imports from China's Zhejiang region, using a law targeting forced labor in China. 2 more companies have been added to the U.S. blacklist as a result. Despite all the heated moments, Chairman Gallagher said that both Republicans and Democrats are fighting for the same cause. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
A military development is setting off alarm bells in the West. Chinese and Russian naval forces are conducting joint drills in the Sea of Japan.
Operations conducted by the Russian Navy and the naval force of the Chinese People's Liberation Army are strengthening the international cooperation between the two countries.
According to Chinese state media, more than 10 warships plus 30 military aircraft have been deployed to the drill. Meanwhile, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has hit the 16th month mark. The bloody conflict has been widely criticized by the West. Aiming to stop the Russian attack, democratic countries have been suppressing Moscow with measures hitting the country's economy, technology, and military fields. But Beijing seems to have taken the opposite approach. Instead, China has maintained robust cooperation with Putin and has accused the West of unjust actions against Russia. A rare audience with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. That's what awaited former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger on Thursday. According to Chinese state broadcaster CCTV, the now 100-year-old former diplomat was hosted at the Diaoyutai State Guest House, a complex typically reserved for visiting foreign dignitaries. During the visit, Xi told Kissinger that China never forgets its old friends, and a statement released later described the former official as a legendary diplomat. Kissinger has a long history with Beijing. He served as U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. During that time, he pushed for friendlier policies toward China, aimed at appeasing the communist regime. That approach played a key diplomatic role in the 1970s, and Kissinger's efforts eventually paved the way for the establishment of formal U.S.-China relations in 1979. Back to his latest visit, details of the talks haven't been shared publicly, but Xi did note the significance of Kissinger's more than 100 visits to China, coupled with his recent milestone birthday, pointing out the 200s. A State Department spokesperson noted that it was aware of the trip, but that Kissinger was acting as a private citizen and not on Washington's behalf. China's pandemic death toll is back in the headlines. A leaked cremation count hints at just how deadly China's COVID-19 waves truly are, though the data was soon scrubbed after its release. Let's dive in.
This figure, posted on the official website of Eastern Zhejiang province, highlights over 170,000 cremations in the first quarter of this year. That marks a jump of 70,000, or some 73% over the same period last year. Comments said the surge was due to the disposal of bodies that had accumulated during the outbreak late last year. Others argued that Zhejiang wasn't the hardest hit area by COVID-19. That means the leaked figure is just the tip of the iceberg, suggesting the enormity of the nation's pandemic deaths. Based on calculations shared on social media, the latest figures project at least 4 million pandemic deaths across the country. That's almost 50 times higher than the official toll of 83,000 claimed by Beijing. With Zhejiang's mortality rate raising eyebrows on social media, authorities soon pulled it offline. The reaction didn't come as a surprise. Since the fourth quarter of 2022, China's local and state civil affairs bureaus have routinely left off cremation numbers from their quarterly reports. That's following Xi Jinping's chaotic overhaul of pandemic controls last December. At the time, private reports flooded in, detailing how bodies were piling up in crematoriums and hospitals. In other attempts to hide the real picture, Chinese health officials later narrowed the definition of what can be considered a COVID-19 death and required local authorities to refrain from labeling death certificates with the term COVID-19.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. How is wealth transfer from the United States helping China's economic growth? And what should the U.S. do to tackle its massive trade deficit with China? American Thought Leaders host Jan Jekielek sat down with Robert Lighthizer, former U.S. trade representative under the Trump administration, for insight. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.